Recently, Thuc and I had the chance to speak with Thuc Doan Nguyen. Thuc is the definition of a superwoman, from being a notable screenwriter, a through and through activist for minorities and women, to being a dog mom. Thuc has worked for Warner Brothers Television as a writer and executive producer, been semi-finalist in the Sundance Film Festival of her screenplay Sense of Delta, and recently a 2022 Academy Gold Fellowship Nominee. With so much more stories to tell, here is Thuc. Reading everything that you've done, I'm like, I want to do all of those one day. And then I've even talking to Dom about this too. I was like looking and like I can't even tell what exactly like your career, because you're just like all over the place. Like you're doing everything. And I'm like, that's amazing. Like that's something I want to be able to say that I can do everything one day like that too. But one thing that really got me interested into your story was you said that you came to America, you guys are refugees and you came through the boat, like through the boating experience, which is really kind of similar to our family too. Our families are refugees, and then we had a few aunts and uncles that also came to America or like to the Philippines by boat. So I just really resonated with that story. And I know that you were a little kid when that happened. Did your parents ever talk to you about that or tell you anything about like your experience or what it was like?
Oh yeah, my parents are very talkative too, kind of very verbose family. So I have heard a bunch of stories, even though I personally don't have a recollection. Before I go into me though, you will do everything, and I'm excited to see that because if I can do it, you can definitely do it 10 times more. I'll help you.
Thank you.
Yes, I came over with my parents and my mother's younger brother, and then a bunch of my parents' students. My parents were teachers in Vietnam. So they
Hmm.
one taught middle school, one taught high school. So they still keep in touch with their students who are
That's
over here
great.
in America. Yeah, it's pretty wild, but it's very treacherous. Like when I heard more about the numbers of Vietnamese people who unfortunately did not survive, just that narrow eye they needle number who made it. So I feel that we're all three lucky to be sitting here today because so many people, you know, perished either in the ocean or once they got to the refugee camps. It still wasn't easy. And then getting to America again,
Right.
more
Yeah. And what
hurdles.
what year did you guys come to America?
I think it was the end of 79 or early 80. It was winter. So
Oh,
I've heard from other refugees too, and I don't remember. I've seen pictures, but snow coats had to be brought to us, and my parents were in their mid 20s and never seen snow before, so
yeah.
a big eye opener for a lot of people from Vietnam to experience that fourth
Yeah.
season.
And then did you guys get to choose where it was the location you guys got to relocate it? So no, you didn't.
No, did your family?
Well, not real, did we?
Yeah, I don't know. It's well, maybe this is part of the Vietnamese American story or the refugee story, right? Where the history is so kind of the story isn't complete,
Mhm.
and they're just like, oh, he said, she said. And I think from our family, we received a sponsorship because I think at least on mom's side, and maybe it was on dad's side too, they did some education in the Philippines, and I could be wrong, but while they're in the Philippines with other refugees, that's where they would know if there was a sponsor out in the states, and they would just kind of take the first chance they got. In South Dakota, or at least South Dakota, Iowa, that Midwest area was the first destination.
Right. Yeah. My parents had told me they heard of Vietnamese people in North Dakota and other places, but we never found any. And where we were sponsored, it was very, I mean, not to sound terrible about it, but it was pretty podunk, as maybe people would say. It was very tiny. And my parents told me that they had wanted to be Australian or Kiwis in New Zealand, raise some sheep, maybe live in a more obscure European country, but Americans were the ones who chose our family to sponsor. So we were brought to a tiny town in eastern North Carolina called Kinston. I think it's even smaller than Sioux Falls.
Hmm. And I know that did you spend most of your childhood there in North Carolina or in Maryland?
Half and half, up until I was 9 years old, about fourth grade. And
Yeah.
then my dad got a job in Maryland, so we all moved up there. And then I spent the other half through high school in Maryland. And then I went back to North Carolina for school because I missed it so much.
Ah. And I can't even start to imagine how white dominant South Dakota was growing up. I don't imagine what it was like for North Carolina or Maryland. What was your experience like growing up in a very white dominant area?
Right. Yeah, in the South, it's very black and white. In Kinston, particularly, it was very white at the time, like who, what kind of people I was surrounded by and what other kinds of children. But when we got to Maryland, it was extra white
Right.
for some reason. So, I mean, in North Carolina, my parents knew a few other refugees, but they weren't, right there. They weren't accessible. We had to travel to visit with them and whatnot. And when my dad went to school in Raleigh, then there were more Vietnamese Americans in the capital city of North Carolina. But Maryland is when it got to be more bizarre. Like Raleigh was such a metropolitan area, there was a lot more diversity. But in Maryland, a lot of bullying set in because I guess people had never seen anyone like me before. They made assumptions. I remember being called a Chinese bitch in middle school and having my locker slammed. So, of course,
Man.
back then it was very hard to explain we're not a monolith. We're not all Chinese. It's like,
Right. Right.
maybe kids' parents were aware of the Vietnam War and whatnot, but then they never really, educate the next generation
Hmm.
of people who were bullies there to explain, you know, how individuality or different ethnicities work. So yeah, that's when I really got like terrible bullying on the school
Oh,
bus. And
jeez.
Hmm.
I felt like all around the clock. I had to be removed from my ninth grade um, high school, first year of high school, and was transferred to another high school because this girl would
Yeah.
yell at the back of my head the whole 45-minute school bus
Jeez.
ride. I
Yeah.
know, but this administration didn't do anything about it at the time. So my mom had
Right.
to pick me up after work. Like our family worked around it to keep me
Yeah.
safe. But
Hmm.
yeah, there were no hate crime, labels or designations or hate speech
Hmm.
back
Hmm.
then,
Right.
and no one was willing to, intervene from the school. So public
Yeah.
school
So,
system.
so with kind of like that, so how did you kind of reconcile that? I guess like even through high school, kind of feeling perhaps like an outcast of sorts. Like, how did you reconcile that, or did you find interest in other things that was more comforting?
Yeah, definitely. I was very fortunate also to have, some friends once I switched schools in 10th grade. So, I became a little more comfortable. I was friends with, white people and black people there. So that kind of helped. And then as soon as I could, I hightailed it back to North Carolina, where the whole Research Triangle Park with Raleigh, Durham, and
Oh,
Chapel
sure.
Hill, where I
Yeah.
went to school. A lot of engineers down there, like
Yeah.
you.
I was just at the Research Triangle Park 6 months ago.
No kidding. What
Yeah.
were you up to there?
So yeah, part of my work right now is I'm doing a research park in South Dakota.
Hmm.
So for marketing, I'm traveling to kind of see how other research parks are doing. So
Oh,
yeah, so
wow.
they got me a visit to there. That's such a cool area of the country, really.
It is. It's gotten so hip,
Yeah.
We used to be a little country, but it was known as the more liberal part of North Carolina and super brainy. It was something like more PhDs per capita, yada yada. So, they like to brag about being brainiacs down there. And I felt more comfortable there and safer there. So that was a good way to cope. And then I started writing essays about it. So people know. A lot of people might
Okay.
not be aware of
Yeah.
how things were back then.
So did you find like writing was always something that like you always had an interest in writing? Because I know like for Ying, she really enjoys writing as well, and she kind of wants to be a writer. And like, has that always been something that's been intrinsic with you, and you kind of just felt like that was kind of the career path you wanted to go down?
Well, yeah, I feel like I've always wanted to be that, but again, not to make my parents sound completely typical because they're not. They're very atypical Asian American parents. But
Yeah.
the one aspect about them was they did not think that writing was a, you know, feasible career when I was younger. But I read a lot because I was alone a lot. Like both my parents worked night and day, so I was a latchkey kid from a very young age, and my sister didn't come along till later. So I spent a lot of time reading, and then I started trying to write little things in elementary school. And I didn't get too much encouragement, honestly. Even my freshman year, college writing teacher wasn't really into what I was doing. She said it was too flowery, so I should
Oh.
give her a call. Um,
Too
but
flowery? Is that what you
yeah,
said?
yeah, I remember that was that was like the comment on some of my work. But I kept going. I wasn't a journalism major. I wasn't any sort of creative writing major undergrad. I changed my major a couple of times. I added one. So yeah, I kind of just finagled my way post grad, I guess, and later in life too, to becoming a more professional writer. But it didn't sink in. I tried everything else under the sun before some of my work became, I guess, acceptable or allowed me to become a professional, aka finally a paid writer.
Huh. Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that's really
And,
cool.
and like through that process, though, it's like I guess just for writing in general, like, was there a moment where you felt like you kind of found your voice in some ways, like, or is that just kind of like an evolution, like an evolving thing where that's still kind of optimizing through time? But how did you find your voice and you felt like, hey, this is my voice in writing and this is what I really feel?
Right, exactly. And I think it's more the latter. I think that my writing style has changed a lot over the years, or the subjects that I tend to focus on. I feel like what I tended to write about was very generalized or affected by my environment growing up in Southern Maryland or right outside of DC, the subjects I would gravitate towards. And it wasn't until somewhere in my 30s, actually, I have a friend who is half German, half Palestinian, who really actually stepped in and put her foot down. She said, "So if you really need to think about Vietnamese American characters more specifically, because back then even screenwriting was a whole different story. We could say, people would call it colorblind, or you would just write characters without being very specific about who they were. And now I make it a point to make my leads Vietnamese American because it falls back upon the right what you know. And plus, a lot of my stuff can't really be interpreted any other way. Like certain roles couldn't be anyone else but a Vietnamese American woman lead. And I make sure that in the descriptions and the dialogue and story points too, to work in some things that our diaspora might know collectively, or that I think people might enjoy learning about our diaspora and connect with us on all kinds of different levels and win hearts and minds that way. But yeah, I'm still working it out. Sometimes I reread my stuff and I shake my head, and I've been refining because it's really embarrassing. Like I used to not really like to share much about myself, or I would make up fictional characters that hadn't, not much to do with anything. They're just, wildly fantastical. But, as time has gone on and years and decades have gone by, I've been trying to, as they say, make it, more specific and therefore more universal in the specificity, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember hearing, I was watching an podcast episode that you did with the Lynn Insider, where
Mhm.
you were talking about making your characters more Vietnamese American lead.
Mhm.
And that was really touching to me because I love watching. I think yeah, I was thinking more about it. It's very rare that we see like either like a Vietnamese American lead on Hollywood or even on TV shows. And I know recently The Sympathizer just came out of Thuc Doan Nguyen's HBO special. And even then it was still focused. It's such a great show and the message is great, but it was just so focused about like the Vietnam War, but it's nothing relevant to like our generation now and to like our usual day-to-day lives. And it would be really nice to see like a Vietnamese American lead that's like telling stories like that's relatable more to me, like my day-to-day life of like school or just like the typical rom-coms where there's a
Mhm.
Vietnamese American lead. Like I feel like that's a really good um empowerment thing to go towards in the future. And that's really incredible.
Thank you so much. And yeah, no, yeah, Jason Lynn, first off, is an amazing human being. So I'm really glad that you watched that. Thank you. You might be the second person who's seen it outside of my mom. So I appreciate that. And Jason is wonderful. And so is his dog. Okay, I'll put that out there. And then next, yeah, I agree with you. It's of course we have to honor the war, but as I'm sure all three of us and a lot of people who are like us feel, yeah, we'd like to move forward a little bit from that. Like we have to acknowledge, why we're Americans. If not for the war, none of us might be Americans. We might just be Vietnamese. But yeah, beyond that, and both of you and your families were just regular old Americans sometimes who happen to be of Vietnamese heritage. So yeah, I try to create characters who have our day-to-day challenges, like you said, or just kind of reflect how we grew up. And I personally don't have any recollection of the war. None of us were
Right.
really around for it.
Right.
So, but people or the general public, the world always seems to want to tie us back to it somehow. Or,
Yeah.
like you said, things we see on TV written by people of other races. It's always like flashbacks to the war,
Yep.
or Vietnamese women specifically, or a certain type of people. And yeah, Vietnamese male roles too, I
Yeah.
don't find to be super progressive to my taste yet. So I would love to see more
Hmm.
advancements in that, and more screenwriters like me get chances. And for me, as just a generalist viewer, I would just want to watch it myself. It's just like we
Mhm.
need
Right.
an actual variety, and truly, as they say, was it a narrative plenitude? Like we can't just be limited to only certain kinds of the Vietnamese diaspora voices as well.
Right.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
I think there
So do
was
you,
a sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, go for it. Go for it.
I think there was this recent show. I think you were the one who actually introduced me to watching it, but then I wasn't a rave for it. Beef on Netflix.
Oh,
Uh yeah, and it was just seeing how, because I think Ali Wong, if I'm not quite, I think she's like full Vietnamese, or she's like mixed of Vietnamese like that. I'm not quite sure,
Her
but it was really
mom is,
great.
yeah,
Yeah.
and her dad
But
is
it
Chinese. Mhm.
Yeah, but it was really great seeing like somewhat of a Vietnamese character up there, and then like some just that I can like personally like resonate with too, like just the whole road rage. I myself had road rage when I'm driving, so it was just like it was just definitely yeah, it was just a great show, and the way they produced it too was just great, and the message and everything like yeah, it was a good show.
Yeah, I know. At first, I think that again, the general public might not look at people like you and me and go, "Oh, she has rage," you
Mhm.
know. But I think we need to acknowledge that, like, Vietnamese diaspora people have hopes and dreams, but we have all kinds of emotions that are over the top, like
Right.
rage. So in that part, it was good to see Ali Wong's character and all of her insecurities and vulnerabilities. How she went about business, but how she was still treated by her white woman boss,
Hmm.
and that
yeah.
they went there with these things, or the fact that she had other urges, and how she felt trapped in her family life, and being a mother and a wife, and being a businesswoman. So yeah, it was so many levels that even went beyond her character in Always Be My Maybe. Yeah, where she was a Vietnamese American
Hmm.
woman chef, and there were Vietnamese American parents for her character in that film. I didn't think that they were portrayed very positively, but to see a very flawed Asian
Yeah.
American
Hmm.
Vietnamese American woman in Beef was, I
Right.
mean, shamefully, I have to admit, I resubscribed to Netflix for that and then canceled it. I had to know, because it was such a, quote unquote cultural zeitgeist, because everyone was talking about it so much.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
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 It was, I think, with the whole presentation of it, like, because it won a few Oscar awards, or was it?
And
Yeah, I think it was the Oscars. Yeah, I remember exactly too. I was, at this is a fun story. So I, I was at my ex-boyfriend's house, and he's white, and his whole family is like really predominantly white, and we were watching the Oscars together, and they had no idea anything about beef whatsoever, and we were watching it, and I was just cheering on her so much for like winning her awards, whatever, and just like I could just tell they weren't as excited as I was, or they couldn't understand like
oh,
my excitement for it. And I'm like,
mhm.
oh, but it was just like it's so nice seeing like a representative of like someone that looks like you to be winning an award, or be achieving
Mhm.
all those highest achievements, because we are so much more than just being Vietnamese. We are so more than just being Asian. Like there's just so much to us. And I feel like the stories that we carry in our heritage just really explains it all in our work. And film writing or screenwriting or just production is just such a great way to showcase it as well.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's I guess for lack of a better word, it's kind of palatable. It's an easy way to get through to people. It
Right.
is the world's farthest reaching media. Like people will pay more attention, unfortunately, to a TV show or a movie than a book a lot of times. So we have a lot of
Right.
adaptations, that and then there are all kinds of things with people with even shorter attention span. So I'm glad there are a lot of content creators out there who kind of make us feel, seen and hopefully help people understand beyond the stereotypes. And I think was it a couple years ago when K Week One was in Everything Everywhere All at Once. And then we also had Hong Kyo too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even though I feel like she's had some lead roles, but a lot of her roles that she gets nominated for, she's still like serving a white person or helping a white person
Right.
with their
Yeah.
main story. So yeah, I would like to see her step up and do more roles that actually center a Vietnamese American person or
Yeah.
Certainly.
woman. But
Yeah.
yeah, we have a little ways to go, as they say.
Right.
Yeah. I know, like, in a previous conversation I had years ago with Mark F. Erickson, he's a photographer from New York. Um, he made this quote, or he said this quote that really sticks in my head. Like, Vietnamese people, at least in Hollywood, are either portrayed as the victim or the villain, right? As part of some storyline. So hearing the both of you kind of speak about just kind of these other nuances, at the end of the day, it definitely just humanizes the individual. But Dope, I'm kind of curious about your experience as like a screenwriter. I imagine it's it could be very competitive, right? Because now you're talking about narratives of just people of color, and there's so many other communities. And if we just even double down the Asian community, there's Chinese, Koreans, and so forth like that. So how do you navigate the competitiveness, or how do you get, I guess, that opportunity to actually realize your work?
That's an excellent question. Realizing the work outside of my own brain and on the page is still extremely difficult. It's like you get, not just for Vietnamese Americans or women or anyone, for any screenwriter to start with, it's very difficult to get to even that first day of principal photography, then, to get all your post-production and in the independent film world to see stuff that came directly from your brain, because then you have so many layers of people who might want the characters changed or ethnicities changed, or I've met Asian Americans who are kind of white worshipy and want to
Yeah.
center white people in Vietnamese American narratives, and it's really difficult to have a total consensus and then get the
Hmm.
money in and keep going. I'm very, very fortunate. I have a literary manager in Los Angeles who pounds the pavement and is super smart and understands what I'm trying to do, and has pushed my stories with Vietnamese American woman leads and Asian American woman leads. Yeah, just amazingly gets it. So in that, I'm very fortunate, because even to find representation is tough for a lot of folks out there. So, and that I've had the same manager for 3 years now
Wow.
is great, who I can just, write to the time now. And so that's, a little step closer. But yeah, when I am just a TV viewer or movie viewer, and a lot of times I still cringe. And then I go through the
Yeah.
credits. I'm like, who did that?
Right.
So yeah, to see what does get realized and then feel like it doesn't really tell the complete picture, or at least even semi more accurate picture of us. And it still only shows kind of people's perceptions. And these
Right.
perceptions have lingered for decades and generations too. It's terrible, because there's that hurdle. And I think that there are people who can help everyone over that hurdle of being more compassionate, more understanding. But we get so limited by various things. Sometimes
Right.
our own people, our own diaspora, because it's so competitive. And then next, it's like a whole layer of people who just can't grasp why we want to be seen
Right.
certainly as human beings. So
Yeah.
yeah, it is very, very challenging, but
Hmm.
once in a while, we see a little breakthrough here and there. So hopefully more and more people can get to tell varied stories, because of course, in our own diaspora, the three of us and your third sibling might have grown up in very similar ways, but then there people who have our own cultural backgrounds who grew up somewhere else in Canada who are completely different, or in Europe or wherever else they landed. And it's just the same as all white people or all Black people, depending on their backgrounds.
Hmm.
We need all the stories.
Right. Yeah. And I think it is, I'm a really big reader too. And that was something that I found that we really related on earlier because my mom always jokes around me that I could like read before I could even talk. Because at the age of 3, I was always just trying to look at books and I loved writing and stuff like that. But I remember being like a little girl in my elementary school, going to the library in school and trying to find like Asian authors because I'm like, I
Mhm.
feel like you just resonate more of the characters. I was just so done of just like looking at picture books or just reading chapter books of people that I really couldn't connect to as well, besides from just like maybe like identical like everyday lifestyles. But I wanted to more connect with like culture and heritage wise. And as a little girl, it was very rare to find authors with the same last name as me or just
Yeah.
like even the same like
Mhm.
ethnicity as me. And I'm like, I know there's a bunch out there because there's so many of us. But I will say, as I've gone older and got to my high school years and now going to my first year of college, you go to Barnes and Noble and you just like go to the library and like it's starting to like become more popular and like more Asian American creatives are starting to write more and tell their own stories and tell stories and based on what they want to see. And it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I do that. I go into bookstores,
Hmm.
large and small, pardon me, and I will go straight because of our last name. I'll go straight to the ends. I'm like, are there any wins?
Exactly.
I'm like, how many copies of Win books did they order? So I'm taking notes. And yeah.
Yeah. I first Asian American author that I read was Ocean Vuong. It was
Oh,
on Earth We're Briefly Beautiful, I think is what the title was.
right.
And that's such a great book. And my high school had it, and the fact that my high school had it, I was like, oh wow,
Whoa.
this is a great
And
step we're taking in the South Dakota School District.
seriously,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, because I'm not sure if some places have banned his book or not, but I'm
Hmm.
glad that is, widely reaching too. And
Yeah.
again, even in books, I'd love to see even, more varieties of Vietnamese diaspora stories too, because sometimes, like his is very different because it's unlike any I've ever seen before. His upbringing and how he
Huh.
grew up
Yeah.
too.
Wait, so there's places that ban books? I know that's a really dumb question. I'm not much of a reader, but I just need to ask. Wait,
Yes. Like even
how
in
did
high
they?
schools, like there's some high schools that ban like your classical like Romeo and Juliet or
Oh,
Fahrenheit 51 and stuff like that, or like
hmm.
Oh,
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Wow. Yeah, those are old school. But
Hmm.
yeah, just because of, some of the content of Ocean Vuong's book, I believe I can't name exactly. Maybe it was Florida, but yeah, I think he was on a couple lists.
jeez.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have a slew of other books coming out in the next couple of years too, like Vicky Nguyen, she's a newscaster, or Amanda Nguyen,
Hmm.
to her story of passing legislation
Yeah.
for
Hmm.
survivors of sexual assault and whatnot. So yeah, those will be big milestones, I
Yeah.
believe. And I'd love to see more non-model minority,
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
voices that come out of our diaspora as well, because I do feel like society at large still has expectations.
Right.
Right.
Like we're talking about before we start recording too, like we're still, even though none of our families opened up a restaurant or a nail salon, it's kind
Hmm.
of like the first thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
people might associate with Vietnamese diaspora people in America specifically. So I
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
the Vuong book, talked about nail salons a lot. And,
Hmm.
we had a book by another woman, The Manicurist's Daughter. So yeah, there's certain, storylines that might be more expected.
Hmm.
And I'd love to see some of the less expected ones.
Yeah. And I was reading online about Sense of Delta, which is a film that, excuse me if I'm wrong, but is it you're writing it or you're creating or producing it?
Yeah, still trying to produce it. Yeah, I wrote the screenplay, and I also had some help from a friend who also grew up in Maryland, Nikki Taylor Roberts.
Hmm.
So it's gone through several different iterations. Like we have, because Nikki's a Black woman, and we've discussed, or we've had versions now where the lead character is half Black and half Vietnamese.
Hmm.
American because of the setting too. It's very Black and Vietnamese in one geographical area. So it's something we've talked about exploring, and it's gone through many different versions, which most of my screenplays have, and especially with writing partners too,
Yeah.
and drafts.
Yeah. Because I found it really interesting because I was reading, I think it was an article, and I'm really like, what's the word? Paranoid when it comes to articles. I want to be reading the right things and not be reading wrong things.
Oh,
But there was this one article that said that you turned down because it was a film that was produced at the like given to the Sundance, right? Sundance Award.
oh yeah, just made it to the second round of one of the labs. So, just making it to the second round of a lot of these labs and competitions
Mhm.
is a big deal for folks. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I
then
think
it's
that
yeah, and then in the article it said that you turned down like an offer from like a $5 million offer that was to make Ken Jeong as one of the characters.
oh, we previously had a director who wanted to shoot it on film, which would
Uh,
have on 35 millimeter film instead of like, on an RA Alexa camera that could simulate this look. So yeah,
There's
that's a
cost to that.
yeah,
Yeah.
stylistic thing. So yeah, it would have been $5 million, and we did have actually Vietnamese American people who had the money, wanted it, but they wanted in the script development to change it so much, to change certain characters who were Middle Eastern and Black
Hmm.
to white men, and then the
Interesting.
conclusion was that they still catered to white men. So I feel that, a lot of Asian Americans and even specifically Vietnamese Americans are okay with self-erasure. And
Hmm.
I'm not.
right.
And it's, I don't always write drama, but I feel like this story specifically is a very serious story, and talked about segments of society that are marginalized. And I personally wanted to keep it that way.
Right.
Right.
And I did not want, I'm sure Ken Jeong is wonderful, but putting him in a role would be distracting
Yeah.
Right.
in certain kinds of films. Like I, he could be in something else that I wrote,
Hmm.
Right.
but for that project, I just, yeah, the self erasure, and then the trying to front loaded with people who have been heard of instead of like giving
Right.
other performers a chance, perhaps,
Hmm.
would totally change the tone of it. Yeah, so we had to close
Interesting.
close that book because it would have been a totally different film than the
Right.
one
Yeah.
philosophically conceived of. It would have been more commercialized, and frankly,
Right.
not something I'd want to put my name on.
Right.
Yeah. So is it like those that kind of propose those changes? Is it usually like contingent on funding? Like they're the ones that are funding the film, therefore
Exactly.
they feel like they have a say to make changes, so it's more like adopted or something.
Exactly. Yeah, it was people who said we already have $5 million.
Wow.
We'll do it if this director does it this way, but we want this swapped out, this swapped out, this swapped out, and it
Yeah.
went so far as to make their own deck with these changes, without consulting me and other people. And I was just like, and what my screenwriting teachers would say, Alan Smithing yourself is
Uh
putting a fake name to a
yeah.
project, so not using your own name. I wouldn't even want to Alan Smithy myself if with those changes. Like I would feel like it was not just a personal mark against my
Right.
ethos, but how I wouldn't want to
Yeah.
put it in the world like that, because the
Yeah.
conclusion was a Vietnamese American woman puts out millions of dollars to buy her white love interest a restaurant where he cooks Vietnamese food to serve her white father in a neighborhood that's mostly all Black and Asian. So I was like, I can't
Yeah.
see that
Yeah.
happening. It's not realistic to me. It's not what I would support in the world. And I hope that people reflect upon that, because it's not the agenda I personally could sign off
Right.
Yeah.
on.
Right. So like with those like a project like that as an example and other projects where funding is the kind of like the bottleneck per se, like how do you so do you as the writer retain like ownership of the intellectual property then and then they purchase that IP from you and then they do the film, or how do you navigate, yeah, like what you wanted, the intellectual property, and then them imposing their changes?
Right. Yeah. At that point for that project, they hadn't optioned it. Like I got not a penny for the rewrites or things they suggested. Like the
Oh,
proper steps weren't taken at that time,
oh.
to be able to even legally move forward. They just kind of jumped the gun with a lot of things because they had their own agenda. So yeah, to do it properly, yeah, sell the IP and the rights and then
Hmm.
negotiate. But yeah, luckily, we hadn't progressed so far as you know, like them being able to run with it. Instead, it was nice to have that plug pulled on that
Right,
because
right.
it's not a message that I believe should exist, or it would
Right.
be very tone deaf for lack of
Yeah.
a better,
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
would
I
make us look
agree.
better.
Yeah. And then yeah, I totally agree with you. I was reading more into what Sense Delta was like that, and I totally agree. That would have been really ignorant to change like the whole storyline, and it just kind of misses the point of what the film was supposed to originally portray. So,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Originally, like it would just be, yeah, totally way off base. Yeah.
so are
It
you working
happens.
on any other works right now besides from the midst of the run of Sense Delta right now?
Yeah, I'm really fortunate actually. I have a really longtime friend, John Lindauer Jr., who I know from us both living in downtown Los Angeles. And he's a wonderful commercial director. He's done some incredibly imaginative stuff for Believe Media. And he and I have a future project together about Asian female pirates who operated in the South China Sea, so all along Vietnam, and who, worked for some people named Nguyen sometimes. And so some fun, true history. And other people have tried to make movies with this subject matter. And, there was a competitive project that was supposed to move forward that didn't get their funding apparently. So now we're full steam ahead and trying to put it together and package it. And so it's fun. And just to brag on my literary manager, he did get it into the hands of an Emmy nominated Asian American actress for Best Actress. So we'll see. Yeah, I usually don't like to announce those things because I don't like to
Hmm.
jinx it, or I don't like to tweet that where my screenplays go. It's all very, I like to keep business hush hush, but I'm proud that,
Great. No, that's definitely something to brag about. That is amazing.
it doesn't mean anything yet. It doesn't mean anything will happen, but it's just nice that people are open to reading that material and possibly supporting that material. But movies can take 10 or 20 years to get made.
Right.
Hopefully
Mhm.
not, but yeah, still baby steps. But it's nice that folks would consider it, and just a testament to the influence and power of having a letter manager who is also Asian American and talks to
Yeah.
folks.
And I guess kind of like one of our final questions is, I guess just overall, if we would take one step back. What are you excited about? Anything that's happening in your life, or anything with work or anything? Like, what's something you're really excited about?
Well, right now it seems really silly, but I've been recently excited about exploring the Gulf Coast here and all the history. Pardon me again, because you guys are the only humans I may speak to all day today. I'll have to get a frog in my. I talk to people online. It's terrible, but I'm really honored to get to talk to you live. So yeah, I've been kind of just tracking different ghost stories here along
Cool.
the Mississippi coast, and that's where I was yesterday,
Nice.
and just came back, and just learning more history of people who've been on the land and whatnot. And so I'm always trying to find something spooky to take a look at, or some old building to peek at, and adventures for my dog. How about
Cool.
both of you? Besides college, what else is going
You want to go
Yeah, you
first?
can take. No, you go first. I have a
Um,
boring life, remember?
on? Oh, I have a club for that. I'll tell you in a minute.
No, I actually have a trip that I'm leaving for tomorrow morning.
No
It's
way.
a seniors girls trip of a couple of my close
Uh-huh.
friends. We're going up to a cabin of one of my friends' family for a couple
Hmm.
of nights, so that'll be really fun. Can't swim, but there's a lake there, so I'm gonna try not to hurt myself in any way.
Okay.
But it'll be really refreshing and relaxing, especially since this whole summer I've spent kind of trying to get ready for college and
Hmm.
work a lot because tuition is not cheap. But it'll be really refreshing before I actually do have to move in 2 weeks. Yeah.
Gosh, and yeah, no, I'm super excited for you. And I'm really thrilled to live vicariously through you. I
Thank you.
remember, I guess it was yesterday, but yeah, my parents dropped me off, and we'll talk more about it. But yeah,
Yeah.
huge step. Can't wait to
Mhm.
see what you do.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and Dung, there's a, I mean, I hate to say I'm still on Facebook, but there's a Facebook group. They're matching twinning Facebook groups. One's called Dull Women and one's called Dull Men. So you can join with me.
Okay. Sweet.
We
I think
talk
I'll
about
fit right in.
how dull we are. I'm not sure we're supposed to talk about it because it's like the first rule of Dull People's Club is that
Okay. Kind of
don't
like
talk
Fight Club.
about,
Yeah, kind
yeah,
of like Fight Club. I understand. Okay.
but we exist and we talk about how boring we are.
Okay, sweet. That sounds awesome. That sounds awesome.
We'll leave it
Anything
up to
else that
Jim to be
is there anything
excited.
else that you like to share on this episode?
Not right off the top of my head. I'm just really glad to be here. So I really appreciate your time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Worksleeve. For more information on Taupe, check out her Insta at Consider8Kahoot. Find us at Worksleeve on Insta. All this information will be found in our show notes. Thank you.